welcome back. Thanks for joining me. My name's Doc, and for those of you who join me regularly, you know that this is Diana right here. And, of course, she says hi. Tonight, I'm going to jump right into this first article because Massachusetts House has approved the quarantine bill. I don't know if you remember, but I did another article on Massachusetts where I went over this bill in some detail. And part of that bill was that you could be quarantined and held and your children taken from you and vaccinated against your will. And so I thought it'd be a good idea to have my child, who is not going to be vaccinated with this vaccine, in the picture with me, so that you can imagine somebody coming and grabbing you and arresting you, right? Because it approved warrantless arrests. Having committed no crime, they can come and arrest you and hold you and quarantine you and then take your children and vaccinate them against your will. And that should just blow you away. And that in the face of the fact that the World Health Organization has come out and said that there is no deadly mutation to the swine flu and that it is much less deadly than regular flu. Very much. Like less than 10% as deadly as the normal flu is every year. And yet here they are passing laws where you can be arrested so that they can forcefully jab you with things that have at least as high a lethality rate as the disease itself, if not higher. We won't know how bad these vaccines are until they've been used for a while, because when they tell you they're safe and they were tested, that's a lie. They got a waiver around the testing so that they didn't have to test, right? The test is going to be on you, okay? And I thought one of the things that you should know, right, is that the very target groups that they have targeted, it says very clearly on the label of these vaccines that the vaccines are dangerous for that group. It says pregnant women and young children and the elderly are at higher risk than anyone else for reactions from these vaccinations. And I wanted to go into that because I know there was mass public outcry against this, and this is just another instance to show you where your elected officials do not represent you and do not care what it is that the public wants. So on to the next bill, right? Because this is the big one right here, folks, okay? Now, this is about that climate change bill that they've been talking about in Copenhagen. And they call it a bill, but it's not. It's a treaty. It's a treaty between nations. And let me explain to you how treaties work, right? When a nation signs a treaty with another nation, okay, it may have pieces of that treaty that are against that nation's constitution or against that nation's common law, okay? And by nature of it being a treaty, that treaty will supersede common law. Well, our common law is the Constitution. And it states very clearly that this treaty does three things. It does enforcement, it does monitoring, but most importantly, creates a world government. Now, Lord Monckton, Christopher Monckton, used to be the science advisor to Margaret Thatcher, and he has gone over this treaty very thoroughly, and he gave a speech at an event called the Minnesota Free Market Institute at Bethel University, St. Paul. Okay? And I want you to pay very close attention to what he said. I'm going to read you his quotes because this is really so true. Okay? And so these are his closing remarks, and I'm just going to start with them now. At the 2009 United Nations Climate Change Conference in Copenhagen this December, weeks away, a treaty will be signed. Your president will sign it. Most of the third world countries will sign it because they think they're going to get money out of it. Most of the left-wing regime from the European Union will rubber stamp it, and by left-wing they don't mean Democrat or liberal. Left-wing in Europe means communist, socialist. And the European Union is a communist/socialist country. Yes, they let their people vote, but they let their people vote for a party, not for people. And that party just puts out what they call a party line. Okay? Now, you vote them in, you don't vote for the people. They put the people in, and then those people carry out their agenda. You do not want that here. I guarantee it. Now let's pick up where we left off. I read that treaty, and what it says is this, that a world government is going to be created. The world government actually appears as the first of three purposes of the new entity. This is the Copenhagen Agreement on climate change, people. Like I told you, it would be by treaty. It would be by treaty that our sovereignty was surrendered, not by vote. The second purpose is the transfer of wealth from countries of the West to third world countries in satisfaction of what is coyly called climate debt. But what that really is Marxist wealth redistribution. Because we've been burning CO2 and they haven't. Yeah, it's seemingly saying that these nations, third world countries, don't burn CO2. We've been screwing up the climate and they haven't, and the third purpose of this new entity, this government, is enforcement. In other words, to come over and enforce this wealth redistribution away from you. You wonder why your jobs are leaving, and you wonder why manufacturing is being torn down here. It is not because of our economic situation, and it is not because of globalization. It is because of Marxist wealth redistribution theory. And they believe the bourgeoisie, i.e. any property owner, which means all of us, right, need to have their wealth taken and redistributed so that it's more even for these other countries. When Obama talked about we want to redistribute the wealth, he wasn't talking about just here. He's talking about taking your bank account and taking half of it and sending it to Nicaragua because you have an air conditioner. Now, there's been more than 30,000 scientists come out against climate change and show that it is a complete farce. And besides that, the largest nations in the world that are the biggest offenders, i.e. India and China, have said they will not sign it and they will not go along with it. And they represent more than 60% of the pollution, of CO2 pollution. Not that anyone has ever proven CO2 causes anything. They haven't. Now let's get back to his quotes. How many of you think that the word election or democracy or vote or ballot occurs anywhere in the 200 pages of that treaty? Quite right, it doesn't. That's because there will be no vote. There will be no democracy on it because it isn't. It's a communist government. Quite right, it doesn't appear once. So at last, the communists who piled out of the Berlin Wall and into the environmental movement, who took over Greenpeace, so that my friends who funded it left within a year, right? Because the original people who started Greenpeace left because the communists took it over as a way to impose communist social change on the free countries. And that is what we've been fighting. And you people have said that's not what's going on for so long, and yet here it is. Now the apotheosis as at hand, they are about to impose a communist world government on the world. They're telling you this is what the Copenhagen Agreement does. It imposes a communist world government on the entire world. You have a president who has very strong sympathies with the communist point of view. He's going to sign it. He'll sign anything. He's a Nobel Peace Prize winner in the middle of all these wars. Of course he'll sign it. And the trouble is this. If that treaty is signed, if your Constitution says that it takes precedence over your Constitution, you can't resign from that treaty unless you get agreement from all the other nation-state parties. And because America is the biggest paying country, they're not going to let you out. That's right. They are hitting us the hardest. and taking the most from us. You wonder why your job is gone? This is why. So thank you, America. And you better listen. So thank you, America. You were the beacon of freedom to the world. It is a privilege to merely stand on this soil of freedom while it is still free. But in the next few weeks, unless you stop it, your president will sign your freedom, your democracy, and your humanity away forever. And neither you nor any subsequent government you may elect will have any power whatsoever to take it back. That is how serious it is. I have read the treaty. I have seen this stuff about world government and climate debt and enforcement. They are going to do this to you whether you like it or not.